I am Rebecca Martinez, and I was 8 years old when my parents abandoned me in a hotel room for 3 days. What they didn't know was that the hotel manager, Marcus Thompson, had been my secret friend for months. By the time those 72 hours were over, my parents would discover that their cruel punishment had backfired in ways they never imagined, and one phone call from Marcus would change the trajectory of my entire childhood. Growing up as the middle child in the Martinez household meant existing in a perpetual state of invisibility. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My older brother Carlos was the golden boy, captain of his high school soccer team, honor roll student, and the son who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. My younger sister Luna was the baby, the precious little princess who got away with everything because she was too young to know better. And then there was me, Rebecca, caught somewhere in between, neither old enough to be taken seriously, nor young enough to be coddled. My father, Roberto Martinez, worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, which meant he traveled constantly throughout the Southwest. My mother, Patricia, was a high school English teacher who spent her days molding other people's children, while somehow failing to notice her own middle daughter slowly disappearing into the background of family life. They weren't intentionally cruel people, or at least I didn't think so back then. They were just overwhelmed, stressed, and completely unprepared for the reality of raising 3 children with vastly different personalities and needs. The favoritism in our house was subtle but unmistakable. Carlos got new cleats every season, and private tutoring when his grades slipped. Luna got dance classes, princess costumes, and elaborate birthday parties with themes that changed based on her latest obsession. I got hand-me-down clothes from my cousin Maria, and a library card for my birthday. When Carlos made mistakes, they were learning opportunities. When Luna acted out, it was adorable mischief. When I did anything wrong, it was evidence of my inherent defiance and proof that I was the problem child who disrupted the family harmony. The pattern of punishment in our household was equally unbalanced. Carlos might lose video game privileges for a week. Luna might get an earlier bedtime for a few nights, but my punishments were always more severe, more creative, and designed to make me understand my place in the family hierarchy. I spent countless hours sitting in the corner of the kitchen, writing apology letters for infractions as minor as forgetting to put my cereal bowl in the dishwasher. I was grounded from playground activities, while my siblings played freely outside. Most memorably, I was once forced to eat dinner alone in the garage, because I had the audacity to disagree with my mother's interpretation of a book we were supposed to read together for a school project. By the time I turned 8, I had developed an elaborate system for avoiding conflict. I became hyper-aware of my parents' moods, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated when they were stressed about work, worried about money, or frustrated with each other. I perfected the art of making myself small, slipping through the house like a ghost, completing my chores without being asked, and keeping my opinions to myself. I thought if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe I would finally earn the same affection and attention they showered on Carlos and Luna. The hotel situation began because of my father's work. Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals was launching a new product line, and Roberto had been tasked with conducting a series of regional training seminars across Arizona and New Mexico. The company provided travel allowances for these extended trips, and my mother suggested that the whole family could turn it into a vacation. She painted a picture of swimming pools, room service, and quality family time away from the distractions of home. Carlos was excited about the prospect of hotel pools and cable television. Luna clapped her hands at the mention of room service ice cream. I was cautiously optimistic that maybe this trip would be different, that maybe in a neutral environment away from home, I might finally feel like an equal member of the family. The Grandview Plaza Hotel in Tucson became our temporary home base for what was supposed to be a week-long adventure. The hotel was a mid-range business establishment, nothing fancy but clean and comfortable, with a decent-sized pool and a small restaurant attached to the lobby. My parents booked 2 adjoining rooms, one for them and Luna, and one for Carlos and me to share. The arrangement made sense financially and practically, though I remember feeling a small sting that Luna got to stay with our parents while Carlos and I were relegated to the sibling room. From the moment we checked in, I was fascinated by the hotel's operations. While Carlos immediately claimed the bed closer to the television and started flipping through channels, I found myself drawn to the bustling activity in the hallways and lobby. I loved watching the housekeeping staff navigate their carts with precision, the front desk clerks juggling phone calls and check-ins with professional efficiency, and the maintenance workers who seemed to know every inch of the building's hidden systems. There was something comforting about the organized chaos of hotel life, the way everyone had a specific role and purpose. It was during one of my exploratory wanderings through the hotel corridors that I first encountered Marcus Thompson. I had been sitting in a small alcove near the ice machine on the third floor, reading a book I had borrowed from the hotel's tiny lobby library, when I heard someone clear their throat politely. I looked up to see a tall man in his early 40s, wearing a crisp navy blue suit, with a name tag that read Marcus Thompson, General Manager. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the sort of gentle smile that immediately put me at ease. "I notice you've been exploring our hotel quite thoroughly," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I'm Marcus, I run this place, and you must be one of the Martinez children." I nodded shyly, suddenly aware that I might be in trouble for wandering around unaccompanied. "I'm Rebecca. I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to be here. I was just reading, and this spot has good light." Marcus chuckled softly. "You're not in trouble at all. I'm impressed actually. Most kids your age are glued to the pool or the television. It's refreshing to see someone who appreciates a good book and knows how to find the quiet corners of a busy place." We talked for nearly an hour that first afternoon. Marcus asked me about the book I was reading, a mystery novel about a detective who solved crimes using observation and logic. He listened intently as I explained the plot and shared my theories about who the culprit might be. He didn't talk down to me or dismiss my ideas, which was a novelty in my young life. Instead, he engaged with my thoughts seriously, asking follow-up questions and sharing his own love of mystery novels. "You know," Marcus said as our conversation wound down, "I have a theory that the best detectives are often the people who notice things others miss. People who are naturally observant, who see patterns and details that escape everyone else's attention." I felt a warm glow of pride at his words. Nobody had ever suggested that my quiet, watchful nature might be a strength rather than a character flaw. At home, my tendency to notice things was often viewed as nosiness or tattling. But Marcus made it sound like a superpower. Over the next few days, Marcus and I developed an unlikely friendship. He would find me during his rounds of the hotel, always making time for brief conversations about books, the hotel business, or whatever was on my 8-year-old mind. He showed me the hidden passages that housekeeping used to move efficiently between floors, explained how the hotel's computer system tracked everything from room occupancy to maintenance requests, and even let me help him review guest comment cards in his office. Marcus had a way of making me feel valued and heard that was completely foreign to my experience at home. He remembered details from our previous conversations, asked follow-up questions about things I had mentioned days earlier, and treated my opinions with the same respect he would show to any adult guest. When I mentioned that I was worried about a math test waiting for me when I returned to school, he helped me practice multiplication tables using hotel room numbers and occupancy rates. When I told him about a book I was excited to read next, he made a note to order a copy for the hotel's small library. My parents were so caught up in their own activities that they barely noticed my absence during these conversations with Marcus. Roberto was busy with his training seminars and networking events with other pharmaceutical representatives. Patricia had discovered the hotel's spa services and was indulging in massages and facials that she claimed were necessary for her mental health after months of dealing with difficult teenagers at school. Carlos had found a group of kids his age who were staying at the hotel with their families, and he spent most of his time at the pool or in the arcade. Luna was content to alternate between swimming and napping, perfectly happy to be the center of attention whenever our parents were around. The freedom I felt during those hotel days was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I had found an adult who was genuinely interested in what I had to say, who valued my thoughts and observations, and who didn't constantly compare me unfavorably to my siblings. Marcus never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. He accepted me exactly as I was, and in his presence I began to discover who I might be when I wasn't constantly trying to avoid conflict or earn approval. It was during our 4th day at the hotel that the incident occurred which would lead to my 3-day imprisonment. We had finished breakfast in the hotel restaurant, and the family was preparing to spend the morning at the pool, while Roberto attended another training session. Luna was being particularly difficult about applying sunscreen, squirming and complaining about the texture and smell. Carlos was impatient to get to the pool where his new friends were waiting. Patricia was stressed about managing both children, while Roberto was busy with work obligations. In the chaos of preparing for pool time, Luna knocked over Patricia's coffee cup, spilling hot coffee across the small hotel table and onto Patricia's white sundress. The stain spread quickly across the fabric, and Patricia's face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. She had been planning to wear that dress to dinner with some of Roberto's colleagues that evening, and now it was ruined. "Luna, you need to be more careful," Patricia snapped, grabbing napkins to blot at the stain. "This dress cost me $60, and now look at it." Luna immediately burst into tears, her bottom lip quivering as she processed the unusual harshness in our mother's voice. Carlos rolled his eyes and muttered something about babies and accidents. And I, in what would prove to be a moment of catastrophic poor judgment, decided to try to help. "Mom, it's okay," I said softly, approaching with more napkins. "Maybe we can get the stain out if we rinse it with cold water right away." I learned about removing coffee stains in Girl Scouts last year. What happened next unfolded in slow motion. As I reached toward the table to help clean up the spill, my elbow accidentally knocked against Patricia's purse, which was perched precariously on the edge of the table. The purse fell to the floor, spilling its contents across the restaurant's tile flooring. Lipstick, car keys, credit cards, and loose change scattered in every direction. Other hotel guests turned to look at our table, and I could feel the weight of their curious stares. Patricia's face transformed from frustration to fury in an instant. "Rebecca, what is wrong with you?" she hissed, dropping to her knees to gather her scattered belongings. "First your sister makes a mess, and now you're making it worse. Can't you just sit still and not touch anything?" I stood frozen, watching as she scrambled to collect her things, while Luna continued crying, and Carlos looked increasingly annoyed by the entire spectacle. "I'm sorry, Mom, I was just trying to help with the stain." "Well, your help is making everything worse." Patricia shot back, shoving items back into her purse with unnecessary force. "Just like always." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Just like always. As if my every attempt to be helpful was inherently destructive. As if my presence in any situation was a guarantee of complications and problems. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back, knowing that crying would only make the situation worse. Roberto appeared at our table, having witnessed the commotion from across the restaurant. His jaw was tight with embarrassment as he took in the scene, Patricia on the floor gathering her belongings. Luna sobbing, Carlos standing with his arms crossed in obvious frustration, and me standing motionless in the center of it all like the eye of a hurricane. "What happened here?" he asked in the low, controlled voice that I had learned to fear more than yelling. Patricia quickly explained the sequence of events, emphasizing my role in knocking over the purse and making the situation worse. In her telling of the story, I had deliberately interfered with a situation that was already under control, turning a minor accident into a major embarrassment. She made it sound as though I had some malicious intent in approaching the table, rather than a genuine desire to help. Roberto's eyes fixed on me with a look of profound disappointment that I had seen too many times before. "Rebecca, go upstairs to your room right now. Carlos, take Luna to the pool. Patricia, let's get you changed so you can salvage what's left of our morning." I walked through the hotel lobby with my head down, acutely aware that other guests and staff members had witnessed our family drama. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless, and by the time I reached the room I shared with Carlos, I was fighting back tears of frustration and shame. I had only wanted to help, but somehow I had managed to make everything worse, just as my mother had said. The punishment that followed was swift and severe. Within an hour, Roberto appeared at the room door, with a stern expression and a plan that would isolate me from the rest of the family for the remainder of our hotel stay. He explained that my behavior in the restaurant was unacceptable, that I had embarrassed the family in front of strangers, and that I needed to learn the consequences of disrupting family activities. "You'll stay in this room until it's time to go home," he announced, his voice brooking no argument. "Room service will bring you meals, but you're not to leave this room for any reason. No pool, no restaurant, no wandering around the hotel bothering the staff. You'll use this time to think about your behavior and how you can do better in the future." I wanted to protest, to explain that I had only been trying to help, that the accident with the purse had been exactly that, an accident. But I had learned years earlier that defending myself only led to longer punishments and lectures about my attitude problem. So I nodded silently and watched as Roberto gathered the spare keycard from Carlos's dresser. "Carlos will sleep in our room for the rest of the trip," Roberto continued. "That way you won't disturb anyone else, with whatever mood you're in." The door closed with a decisive click, and I heard the sound of the electronic lock engaging. For the first time in my 8 years of life, I was completely alone, locked in a hotel room with nothing but my thoughts, and the growing realization that my parents had essentially forgotten I existed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The first few hours of my confinement passed slowly. I tried reading the book Marcus had recommended, but I couldn't concentrate on the words. I turned on the television, but every show seemed to feature happy families doing fun activities together, which only reminded me of what I was missing. I attempted to nap, but the unfamiliar sounds of the hotel and my own racing thoughts kept sleep at bay. Room service arrived around noon with a basic lunch tray, a sandwich, chips, and a juice box. The delivery person, a kind-looking woman named Rosa, seemed surprised to find a child alone in the room. "Where are your parents, Misha?" she asked in accented English, looking around the room as if expecting them to emerge from the bathroom. "They're at the pool," I replied, which was technically true. "They said to have lunch sent up here." Rosa nodded, though she looked concerned. "You okay by yourself? You need anything else?" I shook my head, managing a small smile to reassure her. "I'm fine, thank you for bringing lunch." After she left, I ate mechanically, not really tasting the food. The sandwich was perfectly adequate, but it felt like cardboard in my mouth. I kept listening for sounds from the adjoining room, hoping to hear my parents return, so that maybe Roberto would reconsider the punishment and let me rejoin the family activities. But the adjoining room remained silent throughout the afternoon. As evening approached, I realized that my parents hadn't just locked me in the room for a few hours of reflection. They had genuinely decided to continue their vacation without me, as if I had never been part of the family trip in the first place. The thought was both terrifying and oddly liberating. I was scared because I had never been alone for so long, but I was also relieved to be free from the constant anxiety of trying to avoid their disappointment. Dinner arrived around 6 o'clock. Another room service tray with a basic meal and a note that simply said, "From Mom and Dad." No apology, no inquiry about how I was doing, no indication that they were reconsidering the severity of the punishment. Just acknowledgement that they remembered I needed food to survive. That first night in the hotel room, I lay awake listening to the sounds of other families returning from dinner, children laughing in the hallways, parents discussing plans for the next day. Through the thin walls, I could occasionally hear voices from other rooms, snippets of conversation about tourist attractions and restaurant recommendations. The normal sounds of families enjoying their vacations together. I wondered if my parents were enjoying their dinner without me, if they were relieved not to have to worry about my potential for causing problems. I wondered if Carlos was having more fun at the pool without his annoying little sister around. I wondered if Luna had even noticed I was missing, or if she was too caught up in being the center of attention to think about me. But mostly, I wondered what Marcus would think when he realized I had disappeared from our usual meeting spots around the hotel. Would he notice that I wasn't reading in the alcove by the ice machine? Would he wonder why I wasn't helping him review guest comment cards in his office? Would he assume that I had simply gotten bored with our friendship and moved on to other activities? The thought of Marcus wondering where I was filled me with a sadness that was somehow deeper than the hurt I felt about my parents' punishment. Marcus had been the first adult to treat me as though my thoughts and feelings mattered, and now I was trapped in a room, unable to continue the friendship that had become the bright spot of our family vacation. As I finally drifted off to sleep that first night, I had no idea that my disappearance had already been noticed by the one person in the hotel who truly cared about my well-being. I didn't know that Marcus had been looking for me since mid-afternoon, or that he had already begun asking discreet questions about my whereabouts. I couldn't have imagined that my 3-day imprisonment was about to set in motion a series of events that would not only rescue me from my current situation, but would also fundamentally change how my parents viewed their treatment of their middle daughter. The second day of my confinement began with another room service breakfast and the growing realization that my parents were serious about keeping me locked away for the entire remaining duration of our hotel stay. I had hoped that a night's sleep might have softened their resolve, that they might feel some guilt about the severity of the punishment and decide to let me rejoin the family activities. But the breakfast tray came with the same impersonal note as dinner had the night before, and I could hear the sounds of my family preparing for another day of fun without me. I spent the morning alternating between reading, watching television, and staring out the window at the pool area below. I could see Carlos playing Marco Polo with his group of friends, Luna splashing happily in the shallow end, while Patricia watched from a lounge chair, and Roberto networking with other business travelers at the poolside bar. From my elevated vantage point, they looked like the perfect family unit, complete and content without the disruptive middle child who had caused so much trouble. The isolation was beginning to affect me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant need to monitor my parents' moods and adjust my behavior accordingly, I felt strangely unmoored. I had spent so much of my young life focused on avoiding conflict and earning approval that I hardly knew how to exist without those external pressures. The silence of the hotel room was both peaceful and unsettling, offering a respite from family dynamics while simultaneously highlighting how alone I truly was. Lunch arrived with another polite inquiry from Rosa about my parents' whereabouts, and I gave her the same vague response about them being busy with other activities. She lingered in the doorway longer this time, her experienced eyes taking in details that I wasn't even aware she was observing. The unmade bed that clearly showed only one person had slept in it. The single set of clothes laid out for the next day. The absence of any adult belongings or personal items in the visible areas of the room. "You sure you're okay, baby girl?" Rosa asked softly. "You been by yourself a long time now." I nodded with more confidence than I felt. "I'm fine, I like having quiet time to read." Rosa smiled, but her eyes remained concerned. "Well, you just call down to the front desk if you need anything at all, okay? Anything at all." After she left, I found myself thinking about her words and her obvious worry about my situation. It occurred to me that maybe my parents' decision to lock me in the room for days wasn't as normal as I had assumed. Maybe other 8-year-olds didn't get punished by being completely isolated from their families for extended periods. Maybe the concerned look in Rosa's eyes reflected something more serious than I had realized. But even as these thoughts occurred to me, I pushed them aside. My parents weren't abusive or cruel people, I told myself. They were just frustrated with my behavior and trying to teach me an important lesson about the consequences of disrupting family activities. The punishment was severe, yes, but I had embarrassed them in front of strangers, and embarrassing the family was apparently one of the worst offenses I could commit. The afternoon stretched endlessly before me, and I found myself growing restless in a way that television and books couldn't soothe. I had been an active child before this trip, used to riding my bike around the neighborhood, playing in the backyard, and exploring the small adventures that suburban life offered. Being confined to a single room, even a comfortable hotel room, felt increasingly claustrophobic as the hours passed. I tried doing exercises I remembered from gym class, jumping jacks and sit-ups and stretches that I could perform in the small space between the beds. I rearranged my few belongings multiple times, organized the hotel's informational brochures by color and size, and even attempted to create an elaborate story using the characters from the artwork hanging on the walls. But nothing could completely distract me from the growing realization that I might be spending the rest of our vacation completely alone. Dinner that second night came with the same impersonal note, and I ate while watching families in the pool area below enjoy their evening swim time. The sun was setting behind the desert mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and I found myself pressing my face against the window to take in as much of the view as possible. It was beautiful, the kind of sunset that should be shared with people you love, and I felt a sharp pang of loneliness that was deeper than anything I had experienced before. That night, as I prepared for bed in the too-quiet room, I heard voices from the adjoining room for the first time since my confinement began. Luna was apparently having trouble settling down for sleep, and I could hear Patricia's voice through the thin wall, gentle and patient as she helped my little sister work through whatever was keeping her awake. "Mommy, where is Rebecca?" Luna's voice was clear enough for me to understand, and my heart jumped at hearing my name. There was a pause before Patricia responded. "Rebecca is having some quiet time in her room. She needs to think about her behavior." "But why can't she have quiet time with us?" Luna persisted. "I miss her." Another pause, longer this time. "Sometimes when people make big mistakes, they need to spend time alone to understand why those mistakes hurt other people. Rebecca will be with us again soon." I pressed my ear against the wall, hoping to hear more of the conversation, but Roberto's voice joined the discussion, too low for me to make out his words. Whatever he said seemed to satisfy Luna's questions, because the voices soon faded into the normal bedtime sounds of teeth brushing and soft lullabies. The knowledge that Luna had asked about me, that she missed me, provided a small comfort in the darkness of the hotel room. At least one member of my family had noticed my absence and cared enough to ask questions. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to as I faced another long night alone. I lay awake for hours that second night, my mind racing with thoughts and questions that I had never had reason to consider before. Was this punishment really about the coffee spill and the purse incident, or was it about something deeper? Had my parents been looking for an excuse to separate me from the family activities, and I had simply provided them with the justification they needed? Was this how they really felt about having me as their daughter? That family life was easier and more enjoyable without my presence. The questions swirled in my 8-year-old mind without resolution, creating an anxiety that felt too big for my small body to contain. I had always known that I was different from Carlos and Luna, that I didn't fit into the family dynamic as naturally as they did. But I had never imagined that the solution to that problem might be to simply remove me from the equation entirely. As I finally began to drift toward sleep, I found myself thinking about Marcus and wondering if he had noticed my absence from our usual meeting spots around the hotel. In just a few short days, his friendship had become an anchor point in my life, a relationship where I felt valued and heard in ways that were completely foreign to my experience at home. The possibility that he might be looking for me, that someone might actually miss my company, was the only comforting thought I could hold on to as consciousness finally slipped away. What I didn't know as I fell asleep that second night was that Marcus had indeed noticed my disappearance, and had spent considerable time trying to locate me through discreet inquiries around the hotel. What I couldn't have imagined was that he had already begun to piece together the concerning details of my situation, and was preparing to take action that would change everything. The third day of my imprisonment was about to become the day that someone finally stood up for the invisible middle child, who had learned to expect so little from the adults in her life. The third morning arrived with the same mechanical routine of room service delivery, but this time something was different. Rosa knocked on the door with more force than usual, and when I opened it she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Marcus, his expression serious in a way I had never seen before. The breakfast tray sat forgotten on Rosa's cart as both adults stepped into my room without invitation. "Rebecca," Marcus said gently, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." I felt my stomach drop. Had I done something wrong? Were Marcus and Rosa here to scold me for bothering the hotel staff, or causing problems for my family? I backed toward the window, suddenly feeling trapped in a way that had nothing to do with the locked door. "Am I in trouble?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Marcus shook his head immediately. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble at all. But Rosa and I are very concerned about you. Can you tell us exactly how long you've been in this room by yourself?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth felt dangerous somehow, as if admitting the extent of my isolation might get my parents in trouble or make the situation worse for everyone. But looking at Marcus's kind eyes and Rosa's worried expression, I found myself unable to lie to people who seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. "Since Tuesday morning," I whispered. after the thing happened in the restaurant. Marcus and Rosa exchanged a look that I couldn't interpret, but it made something cold settle in my chest. Rosa knelt down to my level, her work uniform crinkling as she moved. Mija, that was 2 days ago. You've been locked in this room for 2 whole days. I nodded, suddenly feeling ashamed without understanding why. My dad said I needed to think about my behavior, that I embarrassed the family. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rebecca, where are your parents right now? At breakfast, I think. Or maybe at the pool already. They have their own room with Luna. I gestured vaguely toward the adjoining door that had remained firmly closed since Tuesday morning. And your brother Carlos, he's staying with them now. Dad said I might disturb everyone with whatever mood I was in. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications I couldn't understand. Rosa stood up slowly, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder in a gesture of comfort that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I had missed human contact until that gentle touch reminded me what I had been lacking.
Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through something before showing me the screen. Rebecca, I want you to look at this. These are the hotel's guest services records. Do you see anything strange about your family's account? I squinted at the small text on his phone, trying to make sense of the numbers and codes. I don't understand what I'm looking at. Your parents have been ordering room service meals for 4 people every day, Marcus explained patiently. Breakfast, lunch and dinner. But according to our records, only 3 of those meals are being delivered to your parents' room. The 4th meal comes here to you. Alone. The implication hit me like a physical weight. My parents weren't just punishing me by isolating me from family activities. They were systematically pretending I didn't exist, while maintaining the appearance of caring for all their children. They were ordering my meals as part of their family service, but they weren't acknowledging my presence or checking on my well-being in any meaningful way. They're probably just busy, I said weakly, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. Rosa made a soft sound of distress. Baby girl, I've been working in hotels for 15 years. I've seen a lot of families, a lot of different ways people handle their children. But I've never seen parents leave an 8-year-old completely alone for days at a time. Never. It's not completely alone, I protested, desperate to defend my family despite the growing knot of fear in my stomach. They're right next door, and you bring me food. And now you and Marcus are here. Marcus sat down on the edge of one of the beds, bringing himself closer to my eye level. Rebecca, when was the last time one of your parents actually spoke to you? Not just left a note with your meal, but actually talked to you face to face. I had to think about that question longer than I wanted to. Tuesday morning, when Dad told me to stay in the room, and before that, at breakfast, when Mom was upset about the coffee in her purse. Marcus nodded slowly. So in 3 days, your parents have had 2 brief conversations with you. Both when they were angry. They've made sure you have food, but they haven't checked to see if you're okay, if you're scared, if you need anything besides basic nutrition. When he put it like that, the situation sounded much worse than I had been telling myself. I had been focusing on the fact that my parents weren't completely neglecting me, that they were ensuring my physical needs were met. But Marcus was highlighting something I hadn't fully acknowledged. They weren't caring for me as a person, only as a problem to be managed until they could resume their normal family activities. They're probably just really enjoying their vacation, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I did mess things up in the restaurant. Maybe they just need a break from dealing with me. The look that passed between Marcus and Rosa was loaded with adult understanding that I couldn't fully grasp. There were laws and social expectations and professional obligations swirling beneath the surface of their concern. Things that an 8-year-old couldn't be expected to navigate, but that they were suddenly forced to consider. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the pool area where I had spent so much time watching my family enjoy their vacation without me. When he turned back, his expression was resolute in a way that both comforted and frightened me. Rebecca, I need you to understand something very important. What your parents are doing isn't normal. It isn't appropriate. And it isn't legal. The word legal hit me like a cold shock. What do you mean? I mean that parents have a responsibility to supervise and care for their children, especially children as young as you. They can't just lock you in a room and pretend you don't exist because they're frustrated with your behavior. Rosa moved closer, her voice gentle but firm.
In Arizona, what your parents are doing is called child abandonment. Even if they're technically in the same building, leaving you alone and unsupervised for days at a time is against the law. My world suddenly felt unstable in a way I had never experienced. My parents might be doing something illegal. The same parents who lectured me about following rules and respecting authority and making good choices. The parents who grounded me for minor infractions and expected perfect behavior at all times. But they're not bad people, I said desperately. They're just stressed. Dad has work things, and Mom has to deal with Carlos and Luna. I'm the one who caused problems. Marcus returned to his seat on the bed, his voice incredibly gentle. Rebecca, even if your parents are generally good people, and even if you did make a mistake in the restaurant, nothing you did justifies this level of punishment. Nothing an 8-year-old could do would justify being isolated from their family for days at a time. What's going to happen? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. Are my parents going to get arrested? Are they going to take me away from my family?
Why?
The questions tumbled out faster than I could stop them, each one more terrifying than the last. Whatever problems I had with my family dynamic, they were still my family. The thought of being separated from them permanently, of being placed with strangers or sent to some kind of institution, was far worse than being locked in a hotel room. Marcus held up his hands in a calming gesture. Nobody is getting arrested today. Nobody is taking you away from your family. But we do need to address this situation before it goes any further. What does that mean? It means I'm going to have a conversation with your parents about appropriate supervision and family responsibilities. It means we're going to make sure they understand
Why?
what they've been doing isn't acceptable. Rosa nodded in agreement. And it means you're not staying in this room alone anymore. Not for one more minute. The relief that washed over me was so intense that I felt dizzy. The isolation had been affecting me more than I had realized, and the prospect of finally being free from the confines of the hotel room felt like being offered fresh air after days underwater. But what if they get mad? I asked. What if they're angry that you interfered? Marcus's expression grew stern. Rebecca, your safety and well-being are more important than your parents' potential anger. If they get upset because hotel staff insisted on proper child supervision, then they need to examine their priorities. The firmness in his voice reminded me of the confidence he had shown when explaining hotel operations or discussing business strategies. This wasn't Marcus the friend speaking. This was Marcus the professional hotel manager, someone accustomed to handling difficult situations and making decisions based on policy and ethics, rather than personal comfort. What happens now? I asked. Now you're going to pack up your things and come downstairs with Rosa and me. You're going to have a proper breakfast in the restaurant, and then we're going to find your parents and have a conversation about how the rest of your family's stay is going to proceed. I began gathering my few belongings, but my hands were shaking with a mixture of relief and anxiety. After 3 days of careful routine and controlled environment, the prospect of sudden change felt overwhelming. What would my parents say when they saw me with Marcus and Rosa? How would they react to being confronted about their parenting choices by hotel staff? As I packed my toothbrush and the book I had been reading, Rosa touched my shoulder gently. You know this isn't your fault, right, Misha? Whatever problems your parents are having, whatever stress they're dealing with, none of it justifies treating you this way. I wanted to believe her, but the voice in my head that had been shaped by years of family dynamics whispered that maybe if I had been a better daughter, a less problematic child, none of this would have happened. Maybe if I had been more like Carlos or Luna, my parents wouldn't have felt the need to isolate me from the family activities. Marcus seemed to sense my internal struggle. Rebecca, I've been managing this hotel for 8 years. I've seen hundreds of families, including families dealing with stress, financial problems, work pressure, and difficult children. I have never seen parents handle any of those challenges by abandoning one of their children. I wasn't abandoned. I protested weakly. They were next door. Being physically close doesn't mean they were taking care of you. Marcus replied gently. Care means checking on your emotional well-being, making sure you feel safe and loved, ensuring you have appropriate supervision and interaction. Providing food and a place to sleep is the absolute minimum of parental responsibility. As we prepared to leave the room that had been my prison for 3 days, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at finally being free from the isolation anxiety about confronting my parents, gratitude toward Marcus and Rosa for caring enough to intervene, and a deep sadness about what their intervention revealed about my family relationships. The hallway outside my room felt impossibly bright and busy after days of confined quiet. Other hotel guests walked past with their families, heading to breakfast or planning their daily activities, completely unaware of the drama that had been unfolding behind the closed door of room 347. The normalcy of their interactions, the casual affection and easy communication between parents and children, highlighted how abnormal my own family's situation had become. As we walked toward the elevator, Rosa kept one protective hand on my shoulder while Marcus carried my small bag. Their presence felt like a shield between me and whatever consequences awaited downstairs. For the first time in 3 days, I wasn't facing the unknown alone. The elevator ride down to the lobby was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet rather than the oppressive silence I had grown accustomed to in my isolated room. I watched the floor numbers decrease and tried to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Would my parents be angry at Marcus and Rosa for interfering? Would they be embarrassed that hotel staff had noticed their neglect? Would they be defensive about their parenting choices? Or would they be willing to acknowledge that they had made a mistake? When the elevator doors opened into the busy hotel lobby, the sounds and energy felt overwhelming after my days of solitude. Children laughed as they ran toward the pool, families gathered around tables planning their daily adventures, and hotel staff moved efficiently through their morning routines. It was a world of normal family interactions and appropriate supervision, and I realized how far outside that norm my own experience had fallen. Marcus guided us toward the restaurant where I could see my family seated at their usual table near the windows overlooking the pool. Carlos was flipping through a tourism brochure, while Luna colored on a kid's menu with crayons, provided by the restaurant. My parents sat across from each other, Roberto reading something on his phone, while Patricia reviewed what looked like a schedule or itinerary. They looked like any other family enjoying a peaceful vacation breakfast together. Complete and content, with no visible indication that they had been systematically excluding one of their children for the past 3 days. The sight of their casual normalcy, their apparent lack of concern about my absence, hit me harder than I had expected. Marcus paused just outside the restaurant entrance. "Rebecca, are you ready for this?" I took a deep breath and nodded, though I wasn't sure if ready was the right word. But I knew I couldn't go back to that isolated hotel room, and I couldn't continue pretending that what my parents had done was acceptable. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, it had to be better than the alternative of remaining invisible and forgotten. As we approached my family's table, Luna spotted me first. Her face lit up with genuine joy, and she dropped her crayons to wave enthusiastically in my direction. Rebecca's here." The rest of my family turned to look, and I watched their expressions change as they registered not just my presence, but the fact that I was accompanied by 2 hotel staff members who looked very serious about whatever business had brought them to interrupt the family breakfast. Roberto's face shifted from surprise to confusion to something that might have been guilt, though it was quickly replaced by defensive irritation. Patricia's expression went through a similar transformation, settling on a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Carlos looked genuinely happy to see me, as if he had been wondering where I had disappeared to for the past few days. Marcus stepped forward with professional courtesy, but unmistakable authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I'm Marcus Thompson, the general manager of this hotel. I need to speak with you about your daughter Rebecca and the concerning situation we've discovered regarding her supervision and care during your stay with us." The weight of those words settled over the restaurant table like a physical presence, changing the entire atmosphere of what had been a pleasant family breakfast. Other diners glanced over curiously, drawn by the serious tone and official nature of Marcus's approach. My parents suddenly looked very small and very exposed, caught in a situation they clearly hadn't expected to face. The reckoning I had never dared to imagine was finally about to begin. My father's face cycled through several expressions before settling on indignant authority. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what business the hotel management has with our family's private disciplinary matters. Rebecca was being punished for inappropriate behavior, and how we choose to handle that is our concern." Marcus remained completely calm, but I noticed his posture straighten slightly. Mr. Martinez, when a guest's actions affect the safety and well-being of other guests, particularly minors, it becomes the hotel's concern. More specifically, it becomes my legal responsibility as the person in charge of this establishment. Patricia jumped in, her voice tight with embarrassment as she glanced around at the other families who were now openly staring at our table. There's been some misunderstanding. Rebecca hasn't been unsupervised. We've been right next door the entire time, and we've made sure she had everything she needed. Rosa stepped forward, her voice respectful but firm. Mrs. Martinez, I've been delivering meals to your daughter's room for 3 days. Each time I asked where her parents were, she gave me vague answers. Each time I knocked on the adjoining door to check with you directly, no one answered. That little girl has been completely alone. She wasn't alone, Roberto protested. She was in a safe hotel room with food, television, books. She was fine. Marcus pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Mr. Martinez, according to our security logs, your key card hasn't been used to access Rebecca's room since Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m. Mrs. Martinez, your card shows the same pattern. In 3 days, neither of you has entered the room where your 8-year-old daughter has been staying. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Other restaurant patrons had stopped pretending not to listen, and I could feel their judgment settling over our table like a heavy blanket. Patricia's face was flushed with humiliation, while Roberto's jaw worked as if he were chewing on words he couldn't quite bring himself to say. Luna broke the tension by climbing down from her chair and running to hug me tightly around the waist. I missed you so much, Rebecca. Mommy said you were thinking about your behavior, but I wanted to play with you. The simple honesty of my little sister's affection broke something loose in my chest, and I had to blink back tears as I hugged her back. At least someone in my family had genuinely missed my presence, even if she was too young to understand what had really been happening. Carlos looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable. Wait, Rebecca's been locked in that room by herself this whole time. I thought she was just grounded from pool activities. The fact that even my 15-year-old brother had been kept in the dark about the extent of my punishment seemed to shift something in my parents' dynamic. They exchanged a look that spoke of realizations and perhaps regrets that they hadn't been prepared to face. Marcus continued with professional precision. What we have here is a clear case of child abandonment under Arizona state law. Regardless of your intentions or your proximity to the child, leaving an 8-year-old unsupervised for extended periods constitutes neglect. Now wait just a minute. Roberto stood up, his voice rising enough to draw even more attention from nearby tables. You don't know what you're talking about. We're good parents, we provide for our children, we love our children, and we discipline them when necessary. One incident of grounding does not constitute abandonment. Marcus didn't back down from my father's aggressive posture. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and sit down. Making a scene in front of other guests and your children isn't going to help this situation. There was something in Marcus's tone that commanded immediate compliance. Roberto slowly sank back into his chair, but his hands remained clenched on the table. I had never seen my father back down by anyone before, and the sight was both thrilling and terrifying. Patricia tried a different approach, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when talking to difficult parents during school conferences. Mr. Thompson, I think you're overreacting to what was simply a more extended grounding than usual. Rebecca has a tendency toward disruptive behavior, and we felt that a serious consequence was necessary to help her understand the impact of her actions on others. Mrs. Martinez, Rosa interjected, I have 3 children of my own. I understand discipline and consequences. But what you've done goes far beyond normal punishment. That little girl has been eating meals alone, sleeping alone, with no adult checking on her physical or emotional well-being. That's not discipline, that's abandonment. The word hung in the air between us like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. My parents weren't just facing criticism of their parenting choices. They were facing a formal allegation that they had broken laws designed to protect children like me. Marcus opened his notebook and began reading from what appeared to be prepared notes. Here's what's going to happen. First, Rebecca will not be returning to that room alone under any circumstances. Second, I'm documenting this incident in our hotel's guest services report, which will be filed with the appropriate authorities as required by law. Third, if you choose to complete your stay here, it will be under modified circumstances that ensure appropriate supervision for all your children. My mother's face had gone pale. What do you mean, filed with authorities? I mean that hotels in Arizona are mandated reporters. When we encounter situations involving potential child neglect or abuse, we're legally required to report them to Child Protective Services. The phrase Child Protective Services hit the table like a bomb. Luna looked confused, Carlos looked shocked, and my parents looked absolutely stricken. I felt a mixture of vindication and terror wash over me. Someone was finally standing up for me, but the consequences were spinning far beyond anything I had imagined. Roberto's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. You're calling CPS because we grounded our daughter. I'm calling CPS because you abandoned your 8-year-old daughter in a hotel room for 3 days without adequate supervision, care, or human contact. Marcus corrected firmly. The grounding aspect is irrelevant. The abandonment aspect is what triggers my legal obligations. Patricia began crying, quiet tears that she tried to wipe away discreetly. This is a nightmare. We were just trying to teach her consequences. We never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, Rosa said gently. And now we have to deal with the reality of what actually happened, not what you intended to happen. I watched my parents crumble under the weight of consequences they had never anticipated, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that someone was finally acknowledging how wrong my treatment had been. Part of me felt guilty that my family was facing such serious consequences, and part of me felt terrified about what would happen next. Marcus closed his notebook and looked directly at my parents, with an expression that was stern but not entirely unsympathetic. Here are your options. You can pack up and leave immediately, in which case I'll still be filing the required reports, but you can deal with any follow-up from your home state. Or you can stay and complete your vacation under conditions that ensure proper supervision for Rebecca. What kind of conditions? Patricia asked through her tears. Rebecca stays in the room with you and Luna, not isolated from the family. She participates in all family activities for the remainder of your stay, and I'll be personally checking on your family's well-being daily until you check out. Roberto looked like he might object to the supervision, but one look at Marcus's resolute expression seemed to convince him that arguing would only make things worse. And if we agree to these conditions, then when CPS contacts you for follow-up, I can report that you took immediate corrective action when the situation was brought to your attention. That will work in your favor. The negotiation felt surreal. My parents, who had held absolute authority over my life just minutes ago, were now being dictated terms by a hotel manager who barely knew our family. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and I was watching my parents navigate consequences for their actions for perhaps the first time in their adult lives. Carlos finally spoke up, his teenage voice cracking slightly with emotion. Mom, Dad, is this really what happened? Rebecca was alone in that room for 3 whole days. Patricia nodded miserably. We thought she needed time to really think about what she had done. We didn't realize how it would look to outsiders. It's not about how it looked, Marcus said quietly. It's about the impact on Rebecca. Children need human connection, emotional support, and appropriate supervision. Those aren't privileges to be withdrawn during punishment. They're basic requirements for healthy development. Luna tugged on my hand. Rebecca, were you scared by yourself? The simple question from my little sister opened floodgates I had been holding back for days. Yes, I whispered. I was really scared. That admission seemed to break something in Patricia. She stood up and pulled me into a fierce hug, her body shaking with sobs. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry we left you alone. We never should have done that. Roberto looked stricken as he watched his wife hold me. For the first time since the restaurant incident 3 days ago, I felt like my parents were actually seeing me as their daughter rather than as a problem to be managed. Marcus gave us a moment for the family reconciliation before clearing his throat gently. I need your decision about how you'd like to proceed with the remainder of your stay. My parents exchanged a long look over my head as Patricia continued holding me. Some wordless communication passed between them, and Roberto nodded slowly. We'll stay, he said quietly, under your conditions, and we'll cooperate fully with whatever reports you need to file. Marcus nodded approvingly.
Good, I think that's the best choice for everyone, especially Rebecca. As we prepared to reconfigure our family's hotel arrangements, I felt the world shifting around me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The invisible middle child, who had learned to expect so little, had found an unlikely champion in a hotel manager who had refused to look the other way when he witnessed neglect. The remaining days of our vacation would be different, awkward as my parents learned to include me again, but they would be together as a family. And when we eventually returned home, we would all carry the memory of what had happened when someone finally said that my treatment was unacceptable.
For the first time in my 8 years of life, I had experienced what it felt like to have an adult fight for my well-being without expecting anything in return. That knowledge would stay with me long after our hotel stay ended, shaping my understanding of how people should be treated and what I deserved from the relationships in my life. Marcus had given me more than just rescue from 3 days of isolation. He had given me the knowledge that I was worth fighting for. The next 3 days at the Grandview Plaza Hotel unfolded like a completely different vacation. Instead of watching my family enjoy activities from the isolation of my room, I was suddenly thrust into the center of every plan, every meal, every moment of togetherness. My parents overcompensated in ways that felt almost as overwhelming as the abandonment had been, but I welcomed the attention even when it felt forced and uncomfortable. Patricia insisted that I choose our breakfast restaurant each morning, asking repeatedly if the food was to my liking and if there was anything else I wanted to order. Roberto made elaborate plans for family activities, checking with me multiple times to ensure I was interested in visiting the Desert Botanical Garden, the local children's museum, and a nearby ranch that offered horseback riding for beginners. Even Carlos, freed from his role as the responsible older brother covering for absent parents, seemed more relaxed and genuinely interested in including me in conversations and activities. Luna, too young to understand the gravity of what had happened, but old enough to sense the shift in family dynamics, attached herself to me with renewed intensity. She insisted on holding my hand during every outing, sharing her snacks without being asked, and including me in her elaborate imaginative games around the hotel pool. Her innocent affection felt like a healing balm on wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged I was carrying. Marcus kept his promise to check on our family daily, appearing at strategic moments with professional inquiries that were clearly designed to ensure my continued well-being. He would approach our breakfast table with questions about our planned activities, making sure to address me directly and gauge my comfort level with family interactions. During pool time, he would make rounds that brought him past our area, engaging in brief conversations that allowed him to observe how my parents were treating me. These check-ins were subtle enough not to feel like constant supervision, but thorough enough that my parents clearly understood they were being monitored. The knowledge that Marcus was watching seemed to make them more conscious of their interactions with me, more careful about including me in decisions and conversations. On our 4th day, Marcus invited me to join him for our traditional afternoon conversation in his office. The familiar routine felt comforting after days of navigating the new and sometimes awkward family dynamics. His office was exactly as I remembered it, filled with hotel management books, guest comment cards, and the organized chaos of someone who genuinely cared about every detail of the business he ran. "How are you doing with everything, Rebecca?" he asked as I settled into the chair across from his desk. I know this has been a lot of changes very quickly. I considered his question carefully. The truth was complicated in ways that 8-year-old vocabulary struggled to express. "It's better," I said finally. "They're being really nice to me now, maybe too nice sometimes." Marcus smiled with understanding. "Guilt can make people overcorrect. Your parents are probably trying to make up for what happened, but they're not quite sure how to find the right balance yet. Will they go back to treating me like before when we get home?" The fear had been growing in my mind as our departure date approached. Would this newfound attention disappear once we were away from Marcus's watchful presence and back in the familiar patterns of our home life? "I don't think so," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "What happened here changed how they see their own behavior, and they know that child services will be following up with them. That kind of accountability tends to create lasting changes." He pulled out a manila folder from his desk drawer and opened it to reveal several official-looking documents. "Rebecca, I want to explain something important to you. When adults make reports to Child Protective Services, it's not to punish families or break them apart. It's to make sure children are safe, and to help families learn better ways of handling problems. I studied the papers he showed me, recognizing some of the dates and details from our hotel stay but unable to understand all the legal language. What will happen when we go home? A social worker will contact your parents within the next few weeks. They'll want to talk to your whole family, including you, to understand what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. They might also suggest some resources to help your family communicate better and handle conflicts in healthier ways. The thought of talking to a stranger about our family problems felt scary, but Marcus's calm explanation made it seem less threatening. Will I get in trouble for telling you what happened? Marcus's expression grew very serious. Rebecca, listen to me carefully. You will never ever get in trouble for telling a trusted adult when something doesn't feel right or safe. What you did by talking to Rosa and me was exactly the right thing. Adults have a responsibility to listen to children and help them when they need it. I felt a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying begin to lift from my shoulders. Throughout the ordeal, part of me had worried that I was somehow betraying my family by allowing hotel staff to intervene. Marcus's reassurance helped me understand that asking for help wasn't disloyalty, it was self-preservation. There's something else I want to give you, Marcus continued, reaching into another drawer. He pulled out a small notebook, similar to the one he used for hotel business, but smaller and bound in soft purple leather. This is for you. I want you to write down your thoughts and feelings about things that happen in your life. Sometimes when we write things down, it helps us understand them better. I accepted the notebook with reverence, running my fingers over the smooth leather cover. No one had ever given me a gift that acknowledged my inner life, my thoughts and feelings as something worth documenting and exploring. What should I write about? Whatever feels important to you. Happy things, sad things, confusing things, questions you have, goals you want to achieve, dreams for your future. There are no rules except that it's completely private unless you choose to share it with someone you trust. The notebook felt substantial in my hands, like a tool that could help me make sense of experiences that often felt too big or complicated for my young mind to process. I carefully opened the cover and saw that Marcus had written an inscription on the first page. For Rebecca, who has the courage to speak up when things aren't right and the wisdom to know she deserves better. Your voice matters. Tears pricked at my eyes as I read his words. In 8 years of life, no adult had ever told me that my voice mattered, that my perspective had value, that I deserved to be heard and respected. The inscription felt like a promise and a challenge all at once. Thank you, I whispered, holding the notebook against my chest. This is the best present anyone has ever given me. Marcus smiled warmly. I have one more thing for you, but this one is more practical. He handed me a business card with his name and the hotel's contact information. If you ever need to talk to someone, if things at home ever feel unsafe or wrong again, you can call me, day or night, okay? Promise me you'll remember that. I studied the card carefully, memorizing the numbers even as I tucked it safely into the notebook's back cover. The knowledge that Marcus would always be available if I needed help felt like a safety net I had never known existed. I promise. On our final morning at the hotel, my family gathered for breakfast with a mixture of relief and apprehension about returning to normal life. The intense focus on family togetherness over the past few days had been healing in many ways, but it had also been exhausting for all of us. We were ready to go home, but uncertain about how to maintain the positive changes once we were back in familiar surroundings. Marcus appeared at our table one final time, carrying a small gift bag that he presented to my parents. This is just some information about family communication resources and conflict resolution strategies, he explained. Things that might be helpful as you work on strengthening your family relationships. Roberto accepted the bag with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. Mr. Thompson, I want to thank you for caring enough to intervene. I know it wasn't easy to confront us, and I know we didn't make it easy for you, but you were right to do it. Patricia nodded in agreement, her eyes still showing traces of the guilt and regret that had marked her interactions with me since the confrontation. Rebecca is lucky to have found such a caring friend in you. I hope we can be the kind of parents who deserve that friendship. As we prepared to check out and load our luggage into the car, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. I was sad to leave Marcus and the safety of his watchful protection, but hopeful that the lessons learned during our hotel stay would travel home with us. Marcus walked us to the parking garage, helping Roberto load suitcases while Luna chattered about all the fun activities we had done as a family over the past few days. Carlos shook Marcus's hand with teenage solemnity, thanking him for helping our family work through our problems. When it was my turn to say goodbye, Marcus knelt down to my eye level one final time. Remember what we talked about, okay? Your voice matters, your feelings are valid, and you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise. I hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne and the comforting presence that had become such an anchor during the most difficult experience of my young life. Thank you for not giving up on me when no one else was looking out for me. Rebecca, he said softly, there will always be people who care about you and want to help you. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to let them know you need help. As our car pulled out of the hotel parking lot, I pressed my face against the back window to watch the Grandview Plaza Hotel disappear behind us. Marcus stood in the entrance, waving until we turned the corner and he was no longer visible. The drive home to Phoenix was different from our journey to Tucson a week earlier. Instead of excited chatter about vacation plans, we rode mostly in comfortable silence, each of us processing what had happened and what it meant for our family moving forward. Luna dozed against my shoulder while Carlos listened to music through headphones. My parents spoke quietly to each other in the front seat, occasionally glancing back at me with expressions that seemed to blend relief, regret, and determination. 3 weeks after we returned home, the promised social worker visit occurred. Miss Jennifer Santos was a kind but thorough professional who spent 2 hours talking with our family both together and separately. When she spoke with me alone, she asked careful questions about how things had been since our return from vacation and whether I felt safe and supported at home. I was able to tell her honestly that things had improved significantly. My parents were making conscious efforts to include me in family activities and decisions. The punishments for minor infractions had become more reasonable and proportionate. Most importantly, I no longer felt invisible or expendable within my own family. Miss Santos also met with my parents privately, and while I wasn't privy to those conversations, I could see their effects. Roberto and Patricia enrolled in a family communication workshop offered through the local community center. They made changes to our family routines that ensured more one-on-one time with each child. They even instituted weekly family meetings where all of us could express concerns or suggestions for improving our household dynamics. The changes weren't perfect, and there were still moments when old patterns of favoritism or dismissiveness would surface. But the knowledge that their parenting was being monitored, combined with the genuine guilt they felt about what had happened at the hotel, motivated my parents to work consistently on treating all their children with more equity and respect. 6 months later, I received a postcard from Marcus featuring a desert sunset similar to the ones I had watched from my hotel room window. On the back he had written, "Thinking of you and hoping your voice is being heard loud and clear. You're stronger than you know." I kept that postcard in my journal, along with his business card and dozens of pages of thoughts and observations I had written in the months since our hotel stay. Writing had become a way of processing experiences and emotions that felt too complex for everyday conversation, just as Marcus had suggested it might. Years later, as I grew into adolescence and then adulthood, I would look back on those 3 days of isolation and their aftermath as a turning point in my understanding of self-worth and advocacy. The experience taught me that speaking up against unfair treatment wasn't disloyalty or ingratitude, it was necessary self-preservation. It also taught me that sometimes the adults who should be protecting us fail in their responsibilities, but that doesn't mean we're without recourse. There are other adults in the world, people like Marcus and Rosa and Miss Santos, who take their obligations to children seriously and will intervene when they witness neglect or abuse. Most importantly, it taught me that my voice mattered, my feelings were valid, and I deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Those lessons became the foundation for every relationship and life decision that followed. The frightened 8-year-old who had spent 3 days alone in a hotel room grew up to become an adult who never settled for less than she deserved, who spoke up when things weren't right, and who made sure other children knew their voices mattered too. Marcus had given me more than just rescue from a traumatic situation. He had given me the tools to rescue myself for the rest of my life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.